believe that's our cue, Artem. Hey everyone, welcome. Good afternoon. Super excited for today's session on the metaverse as a new asset class. And before we jump in, quick introductions. My name is Mansi Bora. I'm a fellow CFA Boston Society member. I'm also on the Education and Advisory Council, bringing you fintech, blockchain, crypto, education and programming. At my day job, I work at Skynet Labs, which if you're not familiar, it's a decentralized data storage protocol. So again, in the blockchain and crypto industry. And prior to that, I worked in the, as we now call it, traditional finance industry at a couple of different banks and did investment management. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker today, and this is going to be a fireside chat format. We're just going to go back and forth talking about Metaverse for about 35, 40 minutes, and would love to engage everyone here on questions, thoughts, comments that you have. Artem is joining us today from Europe, I believe, and super excited to have you. I think Artem spent most of his career, like mine, prior to crypto in the traditional finance space, mostly in the asset management space, first at Goldman Sachs and then at Lazard, and then transitioned into crypto in 2020, which is exciting. In the crypto space, he worked at Index Co-op, which manages and creates crypto native structured products. And most recently, he co-founded a company called MetaPortal. And I would let you give us a brief introduction, Artem, about MetaPortal and just anything I missed. I know there's a lot, a richer background that you have. So would love to start with a quick introduction.
Absolutely. So yeah, like you said, like traditional finance background in asset management. I sort of was aware of crypto going back to maybe 2013, 2014. I remember us talking about it at Goldman back in the day, but I didn't really invest until 2017. And then I didn't really, at the time, there wasn't much you could do in crypto other than invest in it. So I sort of came back in early 2020 and started playing around with some of the new technology that we had and DeFi and things like that, which then eventually led to deciding to get into it full time. It was a good opportunity with like COVID, remote work, ability to sort of stay at home and contribute like time and energy to this. Yeah, and then in crypto, initially I focused on decentralized finance. It made a lot of sense, and then slowly transitioned to like the metaverse and crypto gaming angle. And so MetaPortal is basically we manage a couple of index products, specifically the Metaverse Index and the Gaming Index, and those are decentralized crypto native kind of index products. And we are also doing basically like advisory and consulting service for crypto games, where we talk to them about designing in-game economies, as well as kind of the decentralized governance aspect and how do you do decentralized governance in games, what models can you use and things of that sort.
That's super interesting. And I do want to dig into the Metaverse Index product that already exists. But before that, I know we wanted to ask a couple of questions to everyone who's joining us here today. So these are just simple questions. We'll be putting them in chat and would love to hear your, read your responses. So the first one is, what is one word that you associate with the term metaverse? When you hear metaverse, like the first word that comes to your mind, we would love to see some responses.
What was your first impression when you first got into space, when you first heard it? Like, what did you think?
I think I definitely associated it with virtual reality, which now after after reading and learning more about it, I realize it's in a way different worlds. But yeah, that was probably my favorite.
Bored apes.
question. Yeah. Uh, interesting. Frontier, metaverse associated with Facebook, makes sense.
So it's like a perfect representation of confusion that people have with the term, right? It's like one is frontier technology, basically. Second is Facebook, and third is like very crypto native. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we can expand on the nebulous term that is metaverse and define it today for everyone. But those were interesting responses, and I guess others have no thoughts. So that's cool too. We also have another quick question for everyone, and would love, again, putting your thoughts in the chat. And this one is essentially curious to hear what your first experience with the metaverse has been, if at all there is one. What was your first experience, Artem?
I think I went to a museum in Canberra in like 2019 or 20 maybe. And they had a VR exhibit, and it definitely like blew my mind a little bit, just because like what you experience, it feels so real, right? You have like the actual physical symptoms, like you're sweating if you're stressed, and you feel like the fear of heights, right? If you're standing, like you have all of those feelings. And I was like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, looks like, yeah, people don't have experience, which is no problem. Hopefully, again, like I mentioned, we'll be diving into it. There is a VR gym close to my place, and I've been super curious as to how that works. So hopefully I'll check it out. But I think for now, I do associate metaverse with gaming a lot. So let's dive in, Artem. Let's define the metaverse. How do you, what does this term mean? How do you define it? What are the boundaries of the metaverse, if there are?
Yeah. So it's quite challenging, right? Because I think our understanding of the term sort of changes all the time. I actually first time heard metaverse maybe in 2020, and it was purely because I was in crypto. I know that Matthew Ball, who is like a bit of an authority on the metaverse, right? He first wrote about it in 2018, and then did a follow-up in 2020. And last year he wrote like a 33,000 word primer on the metaverse and the metaverse stack, right? From kind of the user experience to technology stack, hardware, and so on. So I would recommend like anyone who wants to kind of really dive deep into this to sort of read that piece. And yeah, so since I started trying to explain it to people, my understanding of the term sort of changed at least half a dozen times. So in very simple terms, right, the metaverse is sort of extension and successor to the internet state that we have today. And it's like it's a continuum between internet and metaverse. But it's very challenging for us to sort of come to consensus on where the boundary is. Like where exactly do you cross from, oh, it's just an internet experience, into, oh, now this is clearly I'm in the metaverse, right? And this is this kind of a metaverse experience. And so for me personally, right, it comes down to immersion, like how immersive is the experience, right? You can think about a Zoom call being 2D, not particularly immersive. And so that's, to me, is a pretty clear example of just an kind of an old school internet experience. But I've heard people say, oh, Zoom call is metaverse. Like we already are in the metaverse, Twitter is metaverse. But in my mind, it's not immersive enough, right? And then you can kind of take it a step further, and you can look at like doing something with Oculus and doing something in VR, and you can say, okay, it is pretty immersive, so it gets us closer to metaverse, right? And you can extend that even further and think about, okay, if you have a VR headset paired with haptics, right, like haptic gloves, that brings that extra level of immersion that takes us further from like internet and towards the metaverse. The problem that we have today is like accessing or getting that immersion comes through hardware. And hardware, despite like 30 years of improvement, it's not there yet, right? Like it's bulky, it's heavy, it's expensive, it's not widely available. So having to rely on hardware creates a lot of friction in our experiences, right? And so ideally what you would have is kind of frictionless immersive experiences, right? And that's when we start to bridge from like internet into the metaverse. That's at least how I think about it. And obviously there's a big argument around like, you know, centralized metaverse versus decentralized and open metaverse and kind of what that entails. And I think we can talk about that. But yeah, for now, simply like metaverse is extension of the internet. You can think about immersion and friction as the two characteristics criteria that you apply to your sort of internet metaverse experiences. And that's how you sort of figure out how far you are on the spectrum.
Yeah, I love that you define it as the spectrum where probably, you know, Zoom is on the spectrum where it's low friction, but it's not as immersive. And when you're defining metaverse, you're saying it has to be extremely immersive and at the same time low friction. And that's kind of the spectrum that you're defining the metaverse on.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think for those of us in the crypto space, right, we also like to throw in that it has to be open to actually be considered metaverse, but that for some people that's not necessary.
Yeah, especially Facebook. But I think let's talk about, you know, you mentioned what's the nuance between virtual reality versus metaverse, and how do you kind of bridge that gap?
So virtual, like, I think a lot of people think that the metaverse has to, or is equivalent of like a virtual world, right? And I think metaverse will consist of different virtual worlds, different virtual experiences. Some of them, some of them are going to be sort of accessed through hardware like VR. Some of them are going to be maybe accessed through augmented reality and other types of hardware, other types of technology, and some of them might be 2D, right? But when people say, okay, like metaverse, the only way we can have metaverse is if we have this Ready Player One type of live persistent virtual world. I think that might be the end goal, like where we might want to get to, depending on whether you see that as utopian or dystopian. But I think people who say that don't necessarily understand the technological limitations of getting there. So I think we are quite far away from actually getting there from the technology perspective. What we are much more likely to have, like I said, is just different virtual worlds, different virtual experiences that are going to be accessed through hardware. And ideally, they're going to be in some way interconnected, so you can jump from one to the other without having to like log out or go from one platform to another platform, switch hardware and things of that sort. I think that generally, right, like virtual worlds and gaming go sort of hand in hand, right? And the reason I think that a lot of people are confusing perhaps metaverse and gaming is that over the last couple of decades, it's the gaming industry that really pushed the envelope on creating immersive multiplayer experiences, right? Even from the technological perspective, we can talk about the gaming engines, right? Like the Unreal Engine or Unity. And those are like the most powerful tools out there to create immersive 3D virtual experiences. Like Disney's Mandalorian was shot and like fully rendered in the Unreal Engine. And so that's part of the reason why we see a lot of technology companies buying video game companies, right? Like Microsoft with EA and Bethesda. I think Take-Two bought Zynga. There was another one, I think, from Sony, where they bought Bungie. So that's the main reason. Like over the last 2 decades, video game companies have spent the most time and have done the most on designing these immersive virtual multiplayer experiences, and also figuring out how do you do in-game economies, right? Which are going to be part of the metaverse in the future. So I would actually say that Facebook is probably going to buy a gaming company, whether it Ubisoft or maybe Unity or something like that. But they seem to be a step behind, and it doesn't, frankly, doesn't make too much sense.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned there's a concept of like multiple metaverses existing, being able to move between one metaverse to another, and then the whole concept of having avatars, different gaming or in-game assets, or even land is a big component. But I'm curious, specifically around this concept of multiple metaverses, because a lot of the mainstream conversation revolves around Facebook and how it rebranded to Meta and this like one metaverse experience that they are trying to build. And I think it goes back to, the difference between the open metaverse, which is the decentralized metaverse, and the centralized metaverse. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe, break some myths?
Yeah, so I actually disagree with the framing of metaverses. Like it's singular. You can, I don't like, it doesn't make sense to me to use it as a plural, just like you wouldn't use internet in the plural, right? So the way I see it, like metaverse is sort of is all encompassing, right? And what we're going to have is different virtual worlds and different virtual experiences that make up this overarching metaverse type structure. So that's when people talk about Facebook, yeah, like it's going to have its own virtual world, right? It's going to have you put on Oculus, you end up in your like Oculus home, from which you can go into like different experiences and different virtual worlds and things like that. But it's the ability to then jump from that into something else, and from there into something else, that creates this like network, this mesh that makes up the metaverse, right? This concept. Yeah, so in terms of like centralized versus decentralized, if we think about, again, like the internet to metaverse spectrum, the centralized metaverse is basically a continuation of the status quo as we have today when it comes to like the internet, right? So you have a couple of really powerful platforms, the gatekeepers, and we have kind of a lot of issues with data, with privacy, access, monetization, and so on. So in the centralized metaverse, scenario, I imagine that, you know, everyone's going to have a VR um, headset or some sort of hardware that allows you to access that particular virtual world, right? So you're going to have Apple VR, Facebook VR, Microsoft, Google, right? And so once you enter into their portal, it'll be the same. It'll be the same as like your app store now, right? They'll curate a number of different experiences. They'll charge developers outrageous fees, and they'll sort of sell you ads. And it's going to be more or less the same model. So when it comes to a decentralized metaverse, right? I think it's important to again consider like the internet to metaverse spectrum and say that, okay, because we don't have an open internet today, we can't really like expand it into an open metaverse. So we almost have to build an open internet, open system first, and then we can build open metaverse on top of it, right? And I think that's kind of the approach that we are taking in the crypto space, where, okay, we started with Bitcoin, right, and Ethereum as kind of the protocol for the transfer of value on the internet, right, as similar to perhaps Swift or wires, or chips, things like that. You then look at decentralized finance, and it's kind of our attempt to build an open and permissionless financial system with financial services that you find in traditional world, like lending, borrowing, exchanges, and so on, right? And then you start layering other things on top of it: decentralized social graphs, decentralized reputation, some of the decentralized infrastructure like storage, right? What you're involved with, rendering, some of those things. And eventually you basically get to the point where you've built this decentralized, open, fair economic system in a way, on which you can then start building these virtual experiences that probably are going to use the same type of hardware, right? Hardware so far is really hard to do in decentralized manner. It's hard to imagine a decentralized company that builds a VR headset, right, in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's kind of generally how I like to think about it. And yeah, so kind of the vision with the open metaverse is that we build this system that is kind of open, permissionless, composable, has kind of the true ownership of digital property, and is fundamentally built on principles of self-sovereignty, of individual money, identity, and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of moral and ethical and cultural differences between centralized and decentralized. And I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on whether centralized metaverse is still metaverse.
That's the $1,000,000 question. But I like how you said, and decentralized. It could be decentralized, but it could be distributed, and there's a nuance there. But I think in terms of like when you're defining the open metaverse versus the centralized metaverse, the core ethos behind it is like potentially Facebook creating a metaverse, but then it's siloed and you have to obey by the rules of Facebook, and you might own certain digital assets in that metaverse, but at the end of the day, the control still lies with Facebook in their database, who owns what, and they can censor people, which is what the current internet works like. And then the concept and the vision with the open metaverse is, it's you as an individual have ownership, have control over these assets, over your experiences, over what you want to see and what you don't want to see in this metaverse world. And that really resonates with just the general crypto and Web3 ethos.
Yeah, I think, I think in crypto, we like to use like different terminology, right? And it's like there's crypto, there's Web3, there's metaverse, and it's sometimes quite confusing, like what the difference is. And so the way I sort of like to think about it is Web3 is this remake of the internet in an open and distributed sort of manner with ownership characteristics and with self-sovereignty. And then when you add sort of augmentation and immersion to digital experiences through hardware on top of Web3 model, then that is kind of what gets us to the metaverse, right? To the open metaverse, at least.
Yeah, and I think, like someone said, when they think about the metaverse, they think about Facebook. And is it accurate to say it's much more beyond Facebook? There's just even the origin of metaverse, happened way before, Facebook decided to rename and rebrand themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about, how this is a new asset class and, potentially what are different investment avenues for some of the investment professionals joining us today.
Yeah. So I think again, let's make the distinction between centralized metaverse and decentralized metaverse. So on the centralized metaverse, right, because it's basically continuation of the internet, right? The investment approach, the investment thesis is sort of the same. It's it's kind of big platforms, tech, gaming, semis, cloud storage, extended reality, things like that, right? So if you look at, I think, Round Hill Metaverse ETF, that's sort of what it has. So if you want to invest in the centralized metaverse, that's sort of your choice. So those are your options.
Yeah.
If you think about,
essentially, you're saying the technological infrastructure behind enabling this metaverse, be it hardware, data storage, compute, the multiple stack that's needed to create this centralized metaverse.
Yeah. Again, I think if we go back to that Matthew Ball primer that I mentioned earlier, it's basically you're looking at networking, right? You're looking at bandwidth, latency, so fiber optics, cable. You're looking at computation. You're looking at user interface, right? Gaming, like the rendering gaming engines, things like Roblox, right? The social experience side of things. You're looking at payments as well, to a certain extent. So digital payments, online payments, and that's kind of your stack. And it's interesting. Matthew Ball talks about like consumer behavior as well as part of the stack, right? It's like until people are ready, you can't really get them to do something. But from the investment perspective, it's kind of.
Yeah, and then there's another investment avenue opportunity, which is on the crypto and open metaverse side. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So because crypto is based on this concept of ownership, right? That you can own a piece of the internet, or you can own a piece of the infrastructure, own a piece of the metaverse, so to speak. It opens up a lot of different opportunities. We spoke about virtual worlds, right? And I think there's going to be a big part of our metaverse experience where we're going to go into these different virtual worlds and we're going to, run around, socialize with other people, kind of go to an exhibit or play a game or whatnot. So in crypto, you are actually able to own the virtual real estate in this virtual worlds, right? And you can sort of then develop it, you can rent it out, you can do different things with it. Obviously, it's challenging because still extremely early. We don't know which one of these virtual worlds is going to take off. Where do you buy in that particular virtual world, right? Where's the foot traffic going to be? Are you going to develop that land or not? So there's a lot of questions there, but that's kind of one avenue. There is also kind of a lot of crypto games that have been launched over the last year, and it's sort of an area that has received a lot of investment and sort of picking up. So another kind of investment opportunity is buying these in-game assets, right? That are generally NFTs, and they unlock certain functionality, certain earning potential as well. So that's another one. I mean, you need to be more kind of hands-on with these games to sort of figure out how to assess and utilize these assets. But in-game NFTs are actually relatively straightforward because they generally have some sort of cash flow associated with them. So you can actually value them in a way that is similar to traditional assets using discounted cash flows. Another aspect is like culturally significant NFTs, right? Like we spoke about kind of the cultural movement, the ethics and morals behind the decentralized metaverse, right? And so it creates a certain amount, like a certain type of culture in the space. And so there are a lot of NFT projects, early NFT projects like CryptoPunks that represent that culture in a certain way. There are a lot of kind of generative art projects that also represent this different era in blockchain art, for example. And so there is an argument that can be made for that crypto and NFTs effectively enables this culture as an investment sort of thesis, right? And so people have used that to talk about CryptoPunks, to talk about some of these collections that are culturally significant. And then obviously we have like the governance tokens for all of the platforms, infrastructure, apps, games, virtual worlds, what have you.
It is the governance token, Artem.
Yeah, so it's the easiest parallel to make is to equity, right? It sort of gives you ownership of the platform with potentially certain governance rights. But I would say that, I think everyone in the space is still very early at figuring out what that governance actually looks like and what the economics of the token model actually look like. How does the token accrue value? How does it distribute value? What is kind of the legal implications of those decisions? We've obviously struggled with regulatory clarity in the space and kind of figuring out how to handle these problems. So yeah, I think governance tokens are perhaps the easiest to understand, but have their own sort of challenges.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the closest example was stocks, but it comes with a lot more responsibilities where you're expected to vote on decisions and like, stocks, I mean, there is an expectation, but rarely do people vote unless you have a majority stake. So it sounds like in terms of the crypto side of investments, there's real estate, which is like the metaverse real estate. There are NFT assets, which can be avatars, other assets within the interaction world. There are collectibles and art that you can invest in. And then there's the governance token for governing these metaverse spaces.
Yeah.
What is there an estimation of the opportunity size here in terms of investments?
So I think it just depends on how you define the opportunity set, right? So we've seen like a lot of investment banks, right, put out their assessment of the metaverse, their analysis and what they think the opportunity set is. I've seen numbers anywhere from like 800 billion in annual revenue by like 2024 or something like that from Reuters, maybe. To I think Goldman was like a 2.5 trillion, and Morgan Stanley was somewhere in between. Mostly what in a traditional world, what tends to go into the metaverse bucket, right, is some of the things that we sort of spoke about already, right? So it's hardware for gaming, AR, VR. It's live entertainment, so like concerts, other sort of live virtual experiences. It's games themselves. It's software rendering agents, engines, virtual sort of services, ads and things of that sort. I've also seen people include education as well as fashion in like the metaverse opportunity set. So yeah, and so that's generally what kind of investment banks or what the traditional finance tends to see as opportunity set when they talk about metaverse, right? I think with crypto, it's interesting because I think that open metaverse will actually expand the opportunity set, right? It will expand the size of the opportunity because it is open, it is permissionless, right? It is interoperable. It allows for more things to be built on top of each other, to be connected. So, and I think it also expand the geographical reach of the opportunity, right? Again, because it's permissionless, because it has permissionless financial infrastructure and things of that sort. But the actual opportunity size for decentralized, right, depends, I think, on how much of the market share it takes from the centralized counterparts, basically. And so we've seen that with Bitcoin, for example, right? With crypto, like if you use Bitcoin as definition for cryptocurrency, for example, the adoption rate is at least 2x the adoption rate of the internet, right? So if we sort of apply that and project it forward, I think that more people will gravitate towards the open metaverse space, and it will unlock more sort of value. And I think from like the potential, right? It's more attractive. Like the open metaverse narrative is more attractive because it's basically nothing right now. It's very small. So even if we get to capture 10, 15, 20% of the traditional centralized metaverse market share, that's a significant kind of upside, a significant gain.
Yeah, that's hope. That's the hope. But also it's exciting because, it's this white space where you get to experiment and build these experiences and worlds in a way that probably we haven't tried before. So I think that's what excites me about Web3 generally. And it was interesting you mentioned fashion. I think that was another conversation with, what does your avatar look like in the metaverse? Are you going to have the same expression across different worlds? Say, you're going into a work environment, are you going to use the same avatar versus, social setting when you're just hanging out with friends or experiencing a digital concert? And I think at the core of it, goes back to identity, and we as human being multifaceted and having different identities in a way, depending on the situation and context.
Yeah, and you can see the importance of avatars in terms of their visual characteristics. If you look at avatars from Roblox in like 2008, 2009, and today. Like in 2008, 2009, it was literally like this 2D yellow like human, right? Without any like hairstyle, clothing. It was absolutely horrible, like super simple. And now you look at it and it's got all of the sort of characteristics um, of a person and ability to customize, right? And that's a big part of monetization loop actually for platforms like Roblox, for Fortnite, right? It's selling cosmetics. It's allowing ability to customize avatars. And it also creates sort of work opportunities for artists, right? Because you can design all of these different wearables for avatars. You can design custom avatars, and that is an opportunity for artists that like really didn't exist before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm excited to see the different like creative side, not just, there's a lot happening on the technological side, but creative side, cultural impacts, and we can talk about cultural impacts in a bit, but I'm also mindful of time. So if people have questions, start putting them in chat or the Q&A section and we can take them. But I'm curious about the Metaverse Index that you mentioned briefly at the start. Can you just give a quick overview of what that is?
Yeah, so we initially started thinking about it in like late 2020, and it was basically like the idea was, okay, we're spending all this time online, it's COVID, like we're all stuck in our homes and interacting with everyone digitally. And so there was this very clear shift towards digital experiences, right? And there's a clear shift in narrative of like, we're gonna do more and more um, in yeah, like in the digital world. And the idea was to sort of design an index that would capture that theme in terms of crypto specific projects, right? So virtual worlds, games, audio services like Audius, right? It's competitor to Spotify, NFT marketplaces, things of that sort. So yeah, we launched that in early 2021. At the peak, I think a month or so after Facebook rebranded, we hit about 70, 75 million in assets. And it's sort of gone downhill since, as kind of the space sold off significantly since the beginning of the year.
That's interesting because one of the questions that we've just seen come up is with the market downturn across, I think it's not just in the Web3 crypto space, it's like broad market downturn happening right now. How do you think investment into Web3 will respond?
So I generally don't think there'll be any change in the level of investment into Web3. And the main reason I say that is because there's been a lot of money raised over the last like 18 months or so by VC funds to invest in the space. Like I think A16Z raised or launched like a 4.5 billion fund last week. So I think I saw somewhere that in the last 18 months, there's like over 40 billion has been raised to invest in the space. So yeah, I don't think it's going to slow. If you look at the deal flow now, it hasn't changed much. Like, yeah, there's maybe a little less deals, but there's no issues raising capital. So like we're in the process of thinking about raising capital, and um, it's not really a concern. I think there's just still a lot of money in the space, and like most projects are raising somewhere between maybe 1.5 and 10 million. And if you think about deploying 46 billion into these smaller deals, like it's going to take forever. And so these VCs are mostly funding just about anything that they can see. And it changed a little bit. It was a downturn. They've been a bit more selective. The seed valuations, the private market valuations have come down. But other than that, it hasn't really changed much.
Yeah, I think I've noticed something similar. There's a lot of capital already raised in the space, which is still to be deployed. And just by the nature of this industry being so early on, a lot of projects in the space are still pre-seed, seed, or very early stage and haven't reached that growth stage level. But yeah, valuations definitely are coming down. Now we think twice when a company is valued at 50 or 100 million versus a couple months back, that was like a normal valuation. I think another question, Artem, is there a good source of info news on this market?
I mean, Twitter, I guess. Yeah, it's fascinating to me how Twitter is like the primary source of, I guess, maybe live news, right? Like almost yeah, like immediate news flow. Other than that, there are a bunch of different podcasts and sort of newsletters that are quite good. I think Packy McCormick's like Not Boring is a pretty good one. I think Zima Red by Andrew Steinwald, who's a VC in the space, is pretty good. We publish one. There is a daily newsletter by I think his name is Byron at Blockworks. So there's a lot of good like daily or weekly newsletters that allow you to sort of stay on top of developments. So if you want to shoot me an email or shoot me a message, I can send the links through.
Yeah, a lot of crypto and Web3 lives on Twitter for sure as a social platform. A16Z Crypto also releases a lot of good information, primers, their view on the space, their thesis on why they're investing. And like you mentioned, they recently announced a $4.5 billion fund, which is exciting. Another question we have, Artem, how far out is an experience where we could hang out or get together with other people in the metaverse and be able to experience, 3D versions of each other? How far is that reality?
I think it just depends on the VR adoption. I think outside of that, there's nothing really preventing it. I think you can do it already in VRChat and some of these other platforms. The issue is the quality of your avatar, right? And also capturing things like emotions, like facial expressions, and things like that. So I think that we don't have yet. Yeah, but in terms of ability to be in a virtual world with other people, with other avatars who are customizable, who can have wearables like that already exists. But that sort of the quality of your interaction is not going to be as good because of the facial expressions and that sort of thing. I think that I forgot the piece of technology, but I think even Apple, with like the quality of the camera, it's already good enough to basically map out your face really well and map it onto an avatar and be able to capture facial expressions, right? I haven't done too much work on looking at what I can do with that yet. And if I can take that 3D avatar and bring it into a virtual environment. But yeah, even like consumer level technology, like a camera on your iPhone is already really good at capturing your facial expressions at a pretty high resolution.
Yeah, I think I've been part of like maybe one or two metaverse meetups on crypto related topics. There's one on Bitcoin that happens pretty obvious often, but it's still pretty primitive in terms of like, yes, there are these avatars, but they don't yet feel like humans. And so you can definitely experience these things, but in terms of like you said, the immersiveness of these experiences, we still have a little bit of ways to go.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm curious how this is going to get resolved, right? It's a movement in these virtual spaces while you're wearing a headset, right? So obviously, like, you need a lot of space, which is just not feasible for a lot of people. So I'm curious if we're going to end up with some sort of hand control, right? Where you're going to have like a controller in your hand that will allow your avatar to move in VR. So that's like another limiting factor with VR hardware at the moment, that sort of creates friction and takes away from immersion a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about just cultural impact of metaverse, specifically around future of work, and the impact it can have on jobs. I mean, we are already comfortable with remote working. Any thoughts there in terms of, what do you see the potential impact on the future of work could be?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about future of work, as it relates to sort of crypto and metaverse, right? Like, big part of that is talking about the decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, right? And so DAOs already employ like thousands of people, and the cultural change there, right, is basically this setup to contribute to work on an ad hoc remote basis, right? And an ability to basically work in multiple DAOs at the same time, ability to pick what you want to work on, so much more flexible schedule, and also get compensated in the governance token, right? So usually, so it's interesting. I think it's culturally very different, and it sort of encourages different type of behavior, right? Like, you need to be very proactive. You need to be rather driven. Like, no one's going to tell you like, oh, go do this and go do that. But at the same time, it sort of creates a lot of flexibility, aligns incentives better, and I think opens up the space geographically, right? And then if we also talk about crypto gaming and the whole play to earn phenomenon, right? The ability to earn some money while playing these games. I think at the peak, like, millions of people were earning a wage and income from that. I don't know how sustainable some of those models are, but in general, like, the open metaverse and the narrative of, if you are contributing to a network or contributing to success or protocol or product, that you should be compensated for that work. It doesn't necessarily change the nature of work, but it changes the relationship between company and kind of the user, right? And allows us to benefit from success of the networks that we sort of help create.
Yeah, and also I think it just extrapolates this like expansion of talent pool that already happened with remote working, where, just my company, for example, we were able to hire people beyond our geographic location and find talented individuals across US, across Europe.
Yeah, I think there's also because crypto, right? Like a lot of what crypto is about it is like the hyper financialization of everything, right? And you sort of almost in some ways you sort of couple the opportunity to work flexibly and independently with sort of relatively easy access to capital. So I think like the ability to actually create something in crypto, an opportunity to create something in crypto, get funded, start something from scratch, is actually probably better than in the traditional environment. I think ability to fund through NFTs, ability to fund through tokens, is quite a significant unlock for communities.
Yeah, well, we are almost at time. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, Artem, for sharing your insights on the metaverse. With my fund one, we haven't invested yet on metaverse, but hopefully with fund two, we will. How do people get in touch with you if they have additional questions?
Yeah, so I think the best is probably email. I'll drop it in the comments. It's yeah, so shoot me an email. Alternatively, you can send me a message on Twitter, and that's my Twitter handle.
Yeah, like I said, we live
we live on Twitter.
Yeah, we love if any additional reading materials or anything else that you would want to share. So yeah, if people are interested either in connecting with Artem or getting additional reading materials, please reach out to him. But once again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on Metaverse.
Absolutely. And we are hiring some people. So if someone wants to work in this space and is looking for kind of an early opportunity to sort of learn, figure out how this works, small time commitment, feel free to message me as well.
That sounds great.
All right.
Thank you all for joining. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.